This might be a bit simplistic, but really we're trying to do the history of how we got to here, where we are with the referendum coming up. I'm also conscious of the fact that I need to rush because there is a time factor. So if I'm rushing through, that's the reason. Basically what I want to do today is really answer that. How did we get here? That Scottish distinctiveness. How's it playing in this referendum debate, as it were? And with that in mind, I want to look at 3 topics. That idea, through the constitutional differences that we have, that Scottish distinctiveness, I will argue, is there right from the very beginning. It's extra when the partnership's put together. So there is a differences. How much of that difference has been a base for parties to utilise and exploit? And I will argue that the Scottish card has been exploited by the major parties, the Conservatives first of all, not just the Labour Party, the Conservatives 1880s right through to the 1960s, and then the Labour Party 1970s, 1980s. That playing the Scottish card, using the Scottish issue as a political football, obviously I will argue, basically in that card game, the SNP called Trumps. They're the ones who are the beneficiaries over that, constantly arguing there must be a Scottish distinctiveness, there must be Scottish policies for Scottish people, etc., etc. Trying to touch on the infamous or famous West Lothian question and the iniquities basically of the Parliament formula. I'm trying to touch on that, trying to explain how we got here. Again, the major parties have never, and to my mind, come up with solutions to address those problems, basically. So very quickly, this idea of our constitution, you're supposed to have that flexible, uncodified constitution. It's flexible, we can move it any time, but there is an argument to say all those conventions over the years which make up our constitution, the way we do things, is it flexible or is it a bloody mess? I think it's a case of looking at presently the devolution debate. We could actually accept that it's a bit of a bloody mess. But I've put up there the idea, how would you look at a constitution? How would you address and weigh up? Famous constitutional theorist Anne Wells says, well, any liberal democracy can look at its constitution in a continuum. Unitary at one side, federal at one side, so you have basically a supreme authority. And what you will have, we'll see, hopefully I'll be able to point this out, you have the Tories first of all saying bloody socialist centralisation in London. It's ridiculous. They're claiming centralisation or a centralised state. Then you have, along comes the Labour Party later on saying authoritarian centralisation in the 1980s, all in London. I would argue we've never had that centralisation. It is not a centralised state. I'm sure James will agree with me because I'm sure it was James who picked up on this for me. Broken and urban. See, right from the very beginning, what you were having was a union state. It was never centralised in London. There were always differences. There were extant differences from the very beginning. So you always had a willingness in Westminster to treat different parts of the kingdom differently. And that might have led to where we are at this particular moment in time, basically. So treating as special cases, and you will see that's what's been happening. Even if we move on very quickly, right from the Act of Union itself, even some would say from 1603 onwards, the Union of the Crowns were treated differently in Scotland. And people are quite willingly treating Scotland differently. So you've got the Act of Union. We're allowed to keep a separate church system. We're allowed to keep our separate legal system. The local government and education, because it's the 18th century, it's attached to the church. And that's where this myth, and I'm not using myth here as in Hans Christian Andersen style, I'm using a political science term. It might be true, it might be false, doesn't matter. If it has a political impact, either adversely or beneficially, it's a myth. That's the way we use a myth. So the myth of the Scots being more lovely and cosy and progressive and better people and more democratic. It probably comes from our church system and education system through the Presbyterian Church. We are more democratic in that way. We see the Lord Jesus as the head of the church, so we don't have bishops, we don't have a pope, basically. And that's where the myth starts to be more democratic, more lovely, more kind, more progressive. I know that nonsense, as you know. But if we roll forward a century towards 1885, this is a Conservative government. This is Salisbury's Conservative government. It's 1885, and they set up a Scottish office to oversee administrative devolution. Now, you'll see it's the Conservative Party who are constantly strengthening administrative devolution. They're actually saying, yeah, there is a Scottish distinctiveness. There is a difference there in Scotland, and it's the Tories who are constantly strengthening it. They set up a Scottish office. The Welsh office is not set up until 1964. See, we are in Yorkshire. Some of you can tell me when a Yorkshire office was set up. Never. There's a Secretary of State for Scotland in 1926. Now, by virtue of being Scottish, they're sitting in the Westminster Cabinet where power lies. By virtue of being Scottish. It's never going to happen to the Welsh until about the 1960s, and again, it's never happened here in Yorkshire. So it's the Tories who are constantly strengthening this Scottish distinctiveness. It's the Tories who are strengthening these differences, underpinning the differences, even in a union state, basically. The Goshen formula, it's a Liberal unionist, Goshen, who's Chancellor of the Exchequer and Salisbury's government, who comes up with this, and poor Joe Barnett in the 1970s gets the blame for giving the Scots too much money, saying basically, apparently the Barnett formula is it's not a needs-based formula, it's a population formula, and maybe a bit of geography with it. And Barnett is blamed, well, look where we are today. The Scots got £1,500 more pounds to spend in their public sector services per head more than the English do. And Joe Barnett takes it in the neck for this when he constructs it in 77, implements it in 78, just before that referendum debate ended. But it's a Liberal unionist, it's a Tory basically, a Scottish Unions Association person who's put it into effect as early as 1888, and I can't remember the mathematics of this, it's something like 1/10 of the 10th you get, so it's 11/10. But it's a Tory in the 18th century, who's putting it in. And that strengthening happens all the time under the Tories, not Labour, under the Tories. So by the 50s and through to the 80s, Churchill in particular is constantly strengthening the Scottish office. So they'll have an Under-Secretary for Transport, an Under-Secretary for this, an Under-Secretary. They're constantly doing it all the way through their so they're further strengthening that basically. So much so the rhetoric, that legitimacy rhetoric, is first probably picked up by the Tories. And I'm trying to remember his name now. People at Walter Elliott, who the hell did I forget Walter Elliott's he's a Scottish Secretary of State in the 30s, went to the 40s.
Could you just speak a little bit louder or clearer, please? I can't hear you.
I'll try my best. Maybe you could sit at the front if you could hear me better.
I'll stay here for now.
Yeah. Okay then. Maybe it's the Scottish accent and a Scottish. Anyway, Walter Elliott, he's a Scottish Secretary of State and then a shadow Scottish Secretary of State. But he's using a similar rhetoric to what the Labour Party were using in the 1980s. He's making jokes and it's hitting the front page of the Daily Record, for those of you who know what the Daily Record is, the front page of Scottish newspapers, and his jokes about Arthur Woodburn, who's the Labour Scottish Secretary in the 1940s. He has to phone up London before he can put another bar in his electric fire on. Everything's coming from London. It's all about centralised socialism. In fact, Churchill makes a speech that the nationalisation of Scotland is a nationalisation of public utilities is a denationalisation of Scotland. The Scottish Tories are even the first party to complain that the English are coming up here to Scotland and taking over Scottish seats. It's the Tories who complain about that first. These bloody English, that's socialism for you coming up here. So that rhetoric is playing constantly at that particular time. From the Tories, they're playing the Scottish card first and foremost. And I don't want to bamboozle you with figures here, basically. I've got a few there. Is it showing that success in voting? First of all, 1955. If you look at the Scotland column, they are gaining 50% of the vote. Now, some of the people in this room have been born then. It's not ancient history. Scotland used to be a Tory party fiefdom, as it were. The Labour Party never really wanted Home Rule in the 1950s for a very simple reason. They said it would be a Tory fiefdom. I think people forget that. That's one point to pick up on time. Let's look at the Thatcher years, 1979 to 87. Thatcher, Stuart will talk about the myth of Thatcher, powerful myth in Scotland. But in reality, the drop in the Tory vote between 79 and 87 is only 7 percentage points. 7 points. Whereas if you go back to when Sir Alec Douglas-Hume, a Scottish MP, 1964, bring it forward to October 1974, pre-Thatcher years, there's a drop of 8 percentage points. So the move away from the Tories in Scotland is not just down to Thatcher, although the myth is powerful. It was happening before then. Again, people will say it's because of our different culture, because of our different values, we're lovely, we're adorable. Nonsense. It's all about basically the staple industries. You know, we were very wealthy in the 50s, we had the shipbuilding, we had the steel, and they're all big unionist magnets. You know, you think of Yarrows, Barclay and Curls. These are big names in Scotland, shipyards, the steel names, I can't remember it off the top of my head. But they're huge names attached to the Unionist Party. Along comes the Labour Party, 1960s when we stated we're losing steel, we're losing shipbuilding because of the globalised competition. Along comes the Labour Party and says, we have a solution, we nationalise these industries. So you can actually see that happening there. Also the 1970 election, the Declaration of Perth, as you saw hopefully when it was up, was 1968. They only really gained a percentage points the Tories by actually offering legislative devolution. They were only gaining 1 percentage point. No big jump from 1966, in fact less than 1 percentage point. The other point I should just make before I move on, 2010, look at the Conservative vote in England, 39.6, they've got half the number of seats in England. In other words, they're winning England. Without Scotland, Cameron would be in power basically. It's as simple as that. It's important because when I move on, you'll see why it's important when we move on to the Labour Party. Now, the Labour Party were very much anti-Home Rule in the 1950s, but that was not always so. With Keir Harvey bringing in the Independent Labour Party along the Scottish Party into affiliated to the Labour Party. They actually stood first of all from the 1880s onwards on the Home Rule platform, even trying to bring in a Home Rule bill in the 1920s. But very quickly they moved back to this solidarity. You know, it's very important within a certain sovereign borders that we all share equally. So a loaf should cost the same in Glasgow what it costs in Birmingham. Benefits should be the same in Glasgow what they are in Leeds. That sort of thing. We're very much at that idea of benefits should be the redistribution. I'm thinking of that idea. You redistribute, you must do it centrally. But the rise of the SNPs, we'll see in a few minutes, brings us, there was a famous conference called by the Labour Party in Downtover Street in Glasgow, and this is where they change their position vis-a-vis devolution. This is where they say, wow, this is the only way to counter the SNP is to give the Scottish people legislative devolution. Now, Sir Alan Douglas-Hume, and Ted Heath looking at legislative devolution, they've tried to bring it into the Tories. We will implement it. We will implement it, and this is where they take it. So, what you have from Labour Party taking over in the 1970s, they first of all push for legislative devolution, but they can't get it through in the 1979s for the 4% rule. I'll come back to that. But importantly, all through that period, they're echoing, they're banging the Scottish drum the way the Tories used to do in the 1950s. Very much rigorously banging the Scottish drum and using Thatcher and Thatcherism to bang the Scottish drum. Okay, then this is very quickly running on. So you look at the percentage of Labour votes. I think that quote from James or Gordon Brown is extremely important. He's talking about the delegitimisation of the Tories and being able to govern in Scotland because they don't have the vote. Please keep it in mind, it will become very, very important as we move on. So you have the Labour Party there, basically. You can see that idea, in England. What about their delegitimisation? All through the 80s, 27%, 29%, very poor records in England. But of course, maybe that's why they're banging the delegitimisation drum, as it were, the Scottish drum. Who are the greatest beneficiaries? Well, I would say it's the SNP. I don't have time to get into their history. I was going to go into a bit of their history. I'm quite thankful for that, I think. But they are an amalgam of left-wing radicals, and the Scottish Party was actually a breakaway from the Cathcart Unionist Party. When I was a boy, we were told not to fear the SNP because they were tapping Tories. And this is where it came from, this idea. I think this idea of the tapping Tories echoed through. Ironically, the by-election wins in Hamilton and Govan were very much Labour places. But where they entrenched themselves, where they actually take the votes and hold the seats, the northeast of Scotland and places, they were very much the old conservative rural places. So there might be something there. But by the mid-1970s, and particularly from 1979 onwards, they moved very much to the left. They, hopefully, Stuart will pick up this fundamentalist gradualness, basically, vis-a-vis Scottish home rule, as it were. So by 1979, there's this referendum. There doesn't get through because of the 40% vote rule. That's Jack Cunningham, who puts the rule in Westminster, stops the vote getting through. This is probably why we're here today. Just on the SNP vote, you can see nothing in the 1950s, as it were, right through. That rise of Celtic nationalism is the mid-1970s. So even the turn-off from politics that we're supposed to have today, that the Brits have turned off from the politicians, they're discussing with the politicians, that's just a rerun of what we had in the 1970s. And the rise of the Liberals in England, and the rise of the Nationalists in Scotland and the peripheral areas, basically disgusted with what was happening in Westminster. Again, you see the Thatcher years, 79 to 87. The SNP are not exploiting Thatcherism, their votes going down. But how can they exploit it if the Labour Party is out nationalising the Nats, as it were? Also, just a quick one before I finish, it really is quick, but I think it's extremely important, only do you want to cross it last night myself. The ones with the asterisks, 1999, 2003, 7 and 13, that's obviously the Scottish parliamentary elections. So you'll see it's like Constantina, the SNP vote is up for the Scottish elections, comes down for the Westminster elections, goes back up. Of course, as a political scientist, we can argue the second order elections. Westminster's still so important, that's why, and you can have a protest vote at Scottish elections. But I think, just again, I was looking at this last night and thought to myself, a few years ago I did some work on the AV referendum and the campaigning in the AV referendum. And I utilised the Luke, who's a Canadian, his work and how you operate a referendum campaign. Do you operate it like it was just mirroring the actual election campaign, so you're taking party positions? If that's the case, should Cameron have went up to Scotland? Should the Westminster parties made it a British-style campaign? For the simple reason, what you have, if it looks like it's going to be a Hollywood-style campaign, the SNP will win in. But if it's a British-style campaign, the Westminster parties will win in. If it follows that, the Luke's idea of transferring over